is live. So
Hi everyone. My name is Neta Hussain, and I'm a volunteer at the Wikimedia movement for the last 10 years. Together with my co-presenter Daniel Mishan, I'll be presenting about an overview of the COVID-19 related content on Wikimedia projects. The Wikimedia platforms have been used to share knowledge in various forms, whether it be articles, structured data, images, or news during the times of crisis. So in this presentation, I and Daniel will be talking about the COVID-19 related content of the Wikimedia projects. I will be talking about the state of the content on Wikipedia, and Daniel will be talking about the COVID-19 content on Wikidata, Commons, and other sister projects. The Wikimedia movement was able to respond to COVID-19 crisis so efficiently because of our vibrant community of volunteers, the robust policies that we have in place, as well as due to the technological backing that we have. Together with this, our experience of dealing with past crises, including medical crises such as the Ebola virus outbreak in West Africa in 2014, have greatly helped in navigating our way through this pandemic situation. In this presentation, I shall try to show how the medical content related to COVID-19 has developed on Wikipedia. I will mainly focus on the English language Wikipedia, but I will also talk about the content in language editions other than English. So here is an overview of the talk. I'm starting by zooming in on how Wikipedia and the English version in particular has developed content related to COVID-19 disease, the pandemic, as well as the underlying virus. And then Daniel will zoom out to provide examples of the COVID-19 coverage in other languages and other Wikimedia projects. And we hope that this will lead to a fruitful discussion. On Wikipedia, 166 language versions have an article about COVID-19. And some, like English, also have an article about Wikipedia's coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was on the 31st of December 2019 that there were suspicions about a cluster of previously unknown pneumonia cases. And this was reported from China. And just 5 days after the disease was detected, the English Wikipedia article about COVID-19 first appeared. And on the screen, I'm showing the first version of the article, how it was seen at that time. And the article has developed very much over time. And now, this is the lead section of the same article as is seen today. Since its creation, this article has undergone a series of additions, deletions, and even name changes. This article was first called the coronavirus outbreak, and then it was called the novel coronavirus outbreak. And when the disease was called a pandemic by the World Health Organization, Wikipedia responded accordingly by changing the article name to 2019-20 coronavirus pandemic. And recently, following a lengthy discussion, the article was renamed as COVID-19 pandemic. And this article gives a lot of information about the pandemic situation, and the figures and tables given in this article are updated nearly every day. And this page has been viewed an incredible number of 82 million times. And I think this is one of the most viewed articles Wikipedia has ever produced. Of the 300 or so languages edition of Wikipedia, 188 editions already have articles about COVID-19, and 100,000 editors by now have contributed to COVID-19 articles in all these languages. And many of these editors, like me, have professional expertise in medicine and science. However, I believe that we need more experts, particularly academics, to contribute to Wikipedia. With more expert involvement, we are likely to become more neutral, reliable, and more up to date. With that, the third party sources that rely on us, such as various websites, search engines, and even virtual assistants, such as Alexa and Google Nest, will also become more reliable and updated. Now, this is a part of the Now box related to the COVID-19 pandemic on English Wikipedia. Taken together, Wikipedia in all languages have over 6,000 articles related to COVID-19, and English Wikipedia alone has over 4,000 articles related to COVID-19. We have covered the topic so extensively that English Wikipedia has an article about the COVID-19 situation in every country of the world, including Antarctica. There is also an article for the pandemic for some states in some countries, and there is sometimes an article about the pandemic in some cities. The articles on Wikipedia not only cover the science and medicine related to the pandemic, but also covers other things such as the impact of the pandemic on various socio-cultural issues, the list of events cancelled due to the pandemic, the response of various organizations to the pandemic, and so forth. So we sometimes have articles on overarching topics such as the COVID-19 vaccine, but we also have articles on very specific issues such as the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on abortion in the United States. There are also several articles that reflect the status of COVID-19 vaccination initiatives. We do have a lot of data on our pages, and these require daily updation. Our army of volunteers are involved in keeping this data up to date. And my co-speaker, Daniel, will speak more about the state of the data related to COVID-19 on Wikipedia after me. During a crisis situation like this pandemic, people are in panic, and traditional institutions are slow to respond. And people are actively trying to make a sense of what is happening around them. In such a vulnerable situation, there is a chance that misinformation spreads so rampantly. As Wikipedians, we have always been fighting misinformation in many ways, be it by reporting vandalism as and when one spots it, discussing about controversial edits on top pages, and uncovering editors who have vested interests. We were fighting misinformation before the word misinformation became popular. And there is a Wikipedia page that lists the fake medicines against COVID-19. There is a longer Wikipedia article for listing all kinds of misinformation related to COVID-19. And this is a screenshot to that article from English Wikipedia. Although I think that Wikipedia has done a very good job of documenting misinformation, what we see documented here is only the tip of the iceberg. There is more work to be done in terms of mapping misinformation, particularly in languages with smaller communities. Wikipedians and affiliate organizations created partnerships with trusted institutions during the pandemic to ensure that information in these institutions are reflected on Wikipedia. One of the notable partnerships is with the World Health Organization. The WHO shared their infographics and mythbusters under the CC by SA license, thereby making it available for Wikimedians to illustrate these articles in 10 languages. We were also successful in creating or expanding partnerships with Swedish Public Health Agency, the UNESCO, as well as the UN Women, and getting their text data and media released for use on Wikipedia. Our partners have also uncovered a wealth of COVID-19 information, and we now need so many more volunteers from all languages to use this content in relevant parts of Wikipedia articles. Now I will end my part of the talk with a call to action to participate in building up the corpus of knowledge on COVID-19 on Wikipedia, as well as the other sister projects. And together we have achieved a lot, but still there is a lot more to do. And those of you interested in English Wikipedia can join the dedicated project called Wiki Project COVID-19 to keep updated about the COVID-19 related content on Wikipedia, as well as to know about the existing knowledge gaps in these articles and to find resources that can be used for bridging these knowledge gaps. And now I will give way to Daniel Mission, my co-presenter, to talk about the COVID-19 content across the rest of the Wikimedia projects. Over to you, Daniel.
Okay, thank you. In the second part, we're going to have many more slides, so we are going to switch pace a little bit, but still we have two main parts. We want to look at the Wikimedia projects other than Wikipedia, and we want to look at Wikipedia languages or languages in general other than English. First, some historic background. Next slide, please. So the activities that took place in the framework of the COVID response, they have a number of precedents. So for instance, Wiki Project Medicine was very actively engaged in the Ebola crisis, where lots of articles were translated into multiple languages of those that were actually affected. And similarly, Wikidata has had Wiki Project Zika corpus to cover the Zika epidemic. Next slide, please. And now we're going to take a tour to look at examples from each of these Wikimedia projects that are listed in this logo, and we will actually use this logo as our guiding tool. We will start on the top with Wikimania. Next slide, please. Yeah, so Wikimania last year was supposed to take place in Thailand, and then it was postponed. Then it was converted into a virtual event that is taking place now. And even on the homepage, there are references to the pandemic, and also in the program, not just our session, but there are several other sessions that have references to the pandemic. Next slide. Now this is Wikibooks. So on Wikibooks, you can find resources like this Russian book on the disease caused by the virus. Next one. Next one is Meta. On the MediaWiki, you have lots of different pages, like official information by the Wikimedia Foundation, but also some individual initiatives in multiple languages. Next one is Wikiquote. So here we have some quotes that are related to, for instance, disease X, which is an expected disease that causes problem. And the current pandemic is basically the first instantiation of this disease X. And another example of quotes from the Hebrew Wikiquote. Next one is Wikispecies. And it has a profile of the virus, for instance. Next one is MediaWiki. So here, an important event is the Wikimedia Hackathon each year. The one last year got cancelled initially and then converted to remote hackathon. Next wiki is the Incubator. I did not actually find anything in the Incubator, but there is a new Wikipedia, the Dachbani Wikipedia, that was just released out of the Incubator, and it already has an entry, a short one about the COVID-19. Next one is Wikidata. So here there is also a dedicated wiki project COVID-19, here shown in Macedonian. There are lots of items in Wikidata about the three major things, the virus, the disease, and the pandemic, highlighted in red, and they link to lots of other things in systematic fashion. And then there are tools like Scholia that can be used to visualize the relationships between these different entities. And at the very bottom, we're mentioning a paper that actually describes the coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic in Wikidata. Next slide. We're at Wikivoyage now. And here we see an example in Esperanto and also in Turkish. And so, yeah, travel was heavily impacted by the pandemic, and this is reflected by information that you can find in Wikivoyage. Next one is Wikiversity. So here, several Wikiversities have pages that deal with the disease or the virus or the pandemic or certain aspects of it. And so we have here two examples, Italian, I think, and Arabic. Okay, next one is Wiktionary. So here you have a French and a German explanation for terms related to COVID. Next one is Wikinews. So here in some language versions of Wikinews, there have been thousands of articles around the pandemic. In others, it was much less, but still there are dozens of languages in which Wikinews articles on the pandemic or on the virus are available. Next round is Wikisource. So here we have, for instance, official documents by governments that kind of regulate certain things, change policies with regard to the pandemic or in response to the pandemic. Next one is Wikimedia Commons. Yeah, here we have lots of materials that engage with or that allow to engage the users in multiple fashions. So they can explain hygienic rules, they can explain things about testing, they can explain like what the life cycle of the virus is, or anything else that is relevant to the pandemic. And then finally, Wikipedia again. Nita has already shown you a bit about the English Wikipedia's coverage, but for instance, the article about Wikipedia's coverage of the pandemic also exists in Chinese. Then we have this template that she was showing also exists in a number of other languages. So here it is in Indonesian. And here we have the Kyrgyz article about the pandemic. And so this was a quick tour. Next slide, please. There are some other Wikimedia contexts in which the pandemic was relevant. So for instance, here is an email from the Wikimedia Foundation. There is a dedicated workboard on Fabricator, and a number of events have been canceled. So for instance, a number of things that were planned in the framework of the WikiSite initiative. Next slide. Yeah, so these are the attributions our images are normally linked to their copy on Wikimedia Commons or to the page from which the screenshot was taken. In those cases where this is not the case, they're listed here. And there's some further reading. There is an academic paper about Wikipedia's coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. It actually looks almost exclusively on the English Wikipedia. And yeah, I've reviewed it, and the links are in here. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is the end of the presentation. There is an Etherpad for discussion. And so we invite you to post questions now. And if we don't manage to answer them all in the remaining time, then we will be around and answer them in the Etherpad. Thank you so far.
We don't have any questions so far, but Daniel, can you explain a little bit more about Wikidata and how the data from Wikidata has been reused in like many third-party websites?
Okay, yeah, as we don't have questions yet. Yeah, well, Wikidata is basically a mechanism by which the things that are described in Wikipedia articles as text can be described in a way that makes sense for machines. And on that basis, you can also reconstruct it such that text that makes sense to humans can also be arranged, or visualizations of relationships between different things can be arranged. So for instance, one tool that I'm involved in allows you to get an overview of the scholarly literature on a topic. And so once you have, for instance, papers about the topic, you can identify via those papers the authors of those papers. So you identify people who are experts on certain aspects of the disease or of the pandemic. And then when you group those people, you find out about, for instance, institutions that have certain kinds of expertise. And the data from Wikidata was actually used, for instance, for a number of dashboards. In Tunisia, for instance, there is a national COVID dashboard, and that is fed based off data that is in Wikidata. A similar dashboard exists in Indonesia, where they built the dashboard based on data from Wikidata, which is curated by the entire Wikidata community. And then there are others. Even Google was using the Wikipedia data for a while about the pandemic, even though it was not as structured as Wikidata's data, but it was still semi-structured. That was good enough. Yeah, so that's it. Maybe in response to this question.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I think we also got a lot of media coverage related to the Wikipedia's coverage of COVID-19 pandemic. And I think one of the most important points that the media was focusing on was the misinformation and how the mechanisms inside Wikipedia was able to tackle misinformation in an effective way. And we do have a larger panel discussion about this on Tuesday. And I invite all the audience to participate in that. But Daniel, would you like to explain a little bit about what are the mechanisms that Wikipedia have for countering misinformation, particularly during a crisis situation like the pandemic?
I think the main mechanism, or there are two main mechanisms. One is there is the requirement that anything that's not entirely obvious should have a reference. The other one is that anyone can go in and change things. If you've done something wrong, then people can verify this and they can change it. We actually have a question now. Where's the best place to announce a COVID-19 themed event? Well, it depends on which community you want to reach. Within Wiki, let's say Wiki Project Medicine, every Wiki project in the Wikisphere has its own talk page. Then there are lots of mailing lists, and you can try certain Twitter hashtags or Telegram groups. Wikimania also has a number of channels. So yeah, it really depends on the context, which community you want to reach.
Yeah, that's right. And to add to that, I think people also create project pages on relevant Wikipedias, and like details of the project can be put on the project page, and this link can be circulated in, say, Telegram or social media, and people can sign in on the event page itself on Wikipedia. And sometimes people run events for newcomers, sometimes it's for experienced editors. So it also depends on which user group that you are like looking at. And if it's for the larger community, I think